I realized that I haven't done a wrap-up in about 4 months. I think the last one I did was in November. So I'm here to remedy that with sort of a quarterly wrap-up for this year, but also including December because I didn't do one then either. I imagine this is going to be a bit of a long one, so you might want to grab a snack or a cozy drink and just kind of settle in and let's talk about some books. In December, I finished 2 books and I DNF'd 1 book. So let's start with the 1 book that I DNF'd and we'll just quickly go over that one. This was The Deceivers by Kristen Simmons. This follows a teenage girl named Bryn who is working very hard to escape her present life. She has a very troubled family and she lives in a very troubled, kind of sketchy neighborhood that she really wants to get away from. And Bryn gets accepted into Vale Hall, which is an academy for con artists. So they teach you how to be con artists to, I guess, make that your career. This was the group book for the Mary Bookmas readathon, I believe. And since it wasn't a book that I actively had chosen for myself, I didn't want to buy it, and the only place I could find it was as an audiobook from the library, and I'm really glad I didn't buy it. I might have gotten 10% through the audiobook from the library before I decided to not continue with it. I found Bryn to be very annoying, and I just couldn't make myself do it. Now, I will say that it very well could have been the audiobook that I didn't like and not necessarily the story, so maybe I would have liked it better had I been able to find a printed copy somewhere. As it stands, it's a no for the audiobook, at least. And I don't really have anything else to say other than I really just didn't like it. Obviously, I didn't get far enough into it to really tell you exactly why, other than I found the main character who's narrating the story to be very annoying. The next book I finished in December, and that was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Gawaguchi. I really didn't like this one either, though I did finish it. I gave it 2.5 stars. There's a cafe in Tokyo where a special coffee is brewed, and anyone who drinks this coffee in a certain seat in the cafe is able to travel through time, but only for as long as it takes for the cup of coffee to get cold. It follows 4 visitors, each of them trying to either revisit their past or going into the future to meet, someone for the last time or to deliver something they never got to deliver, things like that. Now, the premise of this story was so intriguing. I was very excited to read this book. I thought this was going to be such a sweet, cozy, lovely story. And it had so much potential. It just really fell short for me. And I think it was more in the execution of the story rather than the story itself. So the writing was very choppy. I didn't like the way that it was written. The characters were very one-dimensional. There really wasn't much to them, the main characters, and we were told exactly what they were thinking and why they were thinking it. There was no room for interpretation at all. We also would get these really weird, random descriptive details of just customers in the cafe that play absolutely no part in the story. Like you would say, this woman walked in, she was wearing a teal shirt and some kind of sandals. But then with our main characters, they were hardly ever described at all. Like, at all. Not what they were wearing, not what they looked like, nothing. So that was weird. I didn't like that either. The story was also very predictable and very repetitious. So again, the premise has great potential. I just don't think it was executed the best way. Now, in saying that, that very well could be because something was lost in translation. Maybe it reads better or has more of an impact in its native language in Japanese, but I don't speak or read or write Japanese, so I don't know. And last, but certainly not least, I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I'm not going to harp on this one too much because I know this has been everywhere with everyone telling you how amazing this book is, and I'm going to be no different. This follows Addie, who is a young woman from the 1700s in France who longs for her freedom. So she feels very trapped in her life. There's been an arranged marriage that she really does not want any part of. And so she goes into the woods on her wedding night. She runs away on her wedding night, or before her wedding even begins. She runs away from her wedding into the woods, and she's praying and praying and praying to absolutely any god that will listen to her. And one does, although it's not the one that she needed to listen to her. So this god, devil thing does grant Addie her wish of ultimate freedom. But of course, he twists that into a curse. Did her wish of freedom by giving her everlasting life, and she can do whatever she pleases because no one will remember that she even exists. That is until she meets Henry in 2014 New York. So this story spans 300 years. We go back and forth between her past and her present and kind of explore her life. It covers themes such as a life versus an existence, freedom versus connection, and what it means to be human, essentially. And I really, really loved this book, as everyone that I've ever seen who read this book also loved it. The characters were absolutely amazing. They were so true to life. They felt like actual people that you could meet outside in your neighborhood somewhere. The writing was stunning, of course. It was so beautiful, and the story was so powerful, and it's just all around an amazing book. And I know people have said this over and over again, but I do want to say this, that this may not mean too much to you if you don't know me very well, but this is one of 2 books in my entire life that have ever actually made me cry. And I don't mean just misty eyes, I mean actual tears. I loved this book. So of course, 5 stars. Let's move into 2021 for the official quarterly wrap up. So we're going to start with January. And in January, I had a pretty slow read. I had a pretty slow month of reading in January. I only finished 2 books. The first step is my favorite book of the month and also one of my favorite books of the year so far, and that is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling where we have our prince, the Beast, resides in sort of an alternate world to ours where he rules over his kingdom known as Emberfall, and he's been cursed by a mage or a magical person. It's not quite an enchantress. I don't think they use that word there. Maybe they do. He's been cursed to relive the same autumn over and over and over again until he can find a girl who falls in love with him. If by the end of each season he has not been successful, he transforms into a beast and he ravages his country. Anytime he dies, the season starts over and we find a new girl. So each season he sends his guard commander, Gray, to find a woman. They have started going into our dimension or world because the enchantress has given his guard commander that ability to cross over. And so they take the women from our world and bring them over into Emberfall. And one night when Gray is in our world in Washington, D.C., he's attempting to bring a woman over, but he is intervened by our heroine, Harper, who stops him from taking her, and instead he then takes Harper. And so then Harper brings in, and of course the story takes off from there. I really, like I said, it's one of my favorite books of this year. I really, really loved it. Not because it's, the best written, critically thinking book that I've ever read, but I rate my books on enjoyment, not necessarily objective things. It's definitely more subjective. And when I finished reading this book, it only took me a couple of days. Like, I compulsively read this book. And when I finished it, I had that feeling, that hole you get in your heart when you finish a book and you're no longer with those characters or wrapped up in that world. And that book absolutely did that to me. I loved it so much. It's also one of the first books fiction books that I've ever read that had any kind of disability rep. So our Belle, Harper, has cerebral palsy. And I think, as far as I know, the author is not disabled at all, but I'm not positive on that. But I think she did do a good job with the representation. I loved it. It definitely 5 stars from me. And the second book that I finished in January is The Golden Compass by Phillip Pullman. I think I'm gonna have an unpopular opinion about this one because people who love this book and the series, His Dark Materials, really love it, and it was okay. I gave it 3.75 stars. It was more than okay, but it didn't quite make it to a like, in my opinion. We follow Lyra, a young girl who's been orphaned, and she was raised in, are they called academies? Something like that, some kind of academic building, something like that. But she was raised there, and children start going missing, including one of her friends, because they have been kidnapped by what they call the gobblers. And so Lyra takes off on an adventure to the far north, to the Arctic, in order to find her friend and rescue him, as well as all the other children that have been taken. In this world, humans have what's called demons, but they're animals that are basically a human's soul personified. So they can speak. They speak to their human, they can speak to each other. They are living things, but they are connected to their humans almost physically through a link of some kind, where what one is feeling, the other one is feeling, what one is kind of thinking, the other one knows what it's thinking, and they're very much their soul. And when they're young, when the humans are children, their demons can readily change form into any kind of animal that they want. And then as they grow older and kind of learn more about who they are, their demon will solidify into a permanent form. I did like the overall premise of the book, and I did like the storyline, and parts of it were really interesting, but I don't know. I probably will finish the series, but I likely won't buy them. I'll probably just get them from the library or something. I will say that my favorite character in the whole story was Ulrich Berniston, which was a talking armored bear. I really loved him, so I listened to the audiobook while I was reading it, and I think I just really loved his voice. So if you can get the audiobook, I would recommend it. I did enjoy that. They had different voices and things, which makes an audiobook much better. In February, I buddy read Laura Thalassa's The Bargainer series with my cousins, and there's a total of 4 books, and I officially read 3 of them in February, and I finished the last one in March, but I'm going to talk about them all together, because with this particular series, it's kind of hard to talk about each individual book without giving away the entire series. So I'm going to talk about the whole series as a whole. So there are, like I said, 4 books. There are 3 books in the series, which are Rhapsodic, A Strange Hymn, and Dark Harmony. But then there's a companion novella, which is book 2.5, called The Emperor of Evening Stars. So this series, we follow a fairy king in the other world who kind of has a side job here on Earth where he's known as the bargainer. He strikes deals or bargains with people here on Earth to kind of help them maybe clean up a mess they've made or cover up a crime they've committed, anything like that. But of course, anytime a fairy's magic is involved, there's always some kind of payment system, and this is no different. And so he'll grant a favor or wish to help somebody, and then at any point he can force you to repay him. And those repayment systems are typically not very pleasant. He has made a reputation for himself being very cruel in his repayment systems. Then we also have Callie, who is a 16-year-old siren who kind of gets herself into a little bit of trouble, and so she calls upon the bargainer in order to help clean it up. And usually the bargainer will only allow his clients, 1 or 2 bargains. That's your limit, that's it. But with Callie, somehow it's different. And over the course of a year, Callie strikes hundreds of bargains with the bargainer, but he never asks for repayment. That is until 7 years later, when he mysteriously reappears in her life, asking that repayment begins. So after 7 years, Callie grows up and she has become a private investigator. She owns her own business. And in the other world, in Dez's kingdom, his women have been going missing. So these female soldiers mostly have been taken. Nobody knows where they go or who's taken them. And then they have mysteriously reappeared in a death-like sleep while clutching babies to their chests. So he is enlisting the help of Callie, the private investigator, to help him kind of figure out what's going on in his kingdom. Now, that is the major plot of this book. This whole series is definitely a fantasy romance. Although the romance is not the main only storyline in the book, there is that mystery happening. So it's not just purely a romance, which is nice. I really enjoyed every book in this series. I gave them all 4 stars. Now, I will say that Laura Thalassa is a self-published author, and especially in the first book, Rhapsodic, there were so many typos. I mean, it was bad, especially the first half of that book. It did ease up in the second half of the first book and throughout the series, but those typos never ever go away. So if that's something that bothers you, stay far, far away from any book in this series. I think that if I didn't like the story or the characters as much as I did, I definitely would have given up just trying to get through the first half of that book. But the characters really are great, so do keep that in mind. I think that while there is a mystery afoot in this series, most of it is pretty guessable, like it was easily predicted. There were parts of the mystery that I had already figured out pretty early on in book 2 that the characters didn't figure out until closer to the end of book 3. But again, this is a fantasy romance, so you're not really technically here for the mystery, so I guess I can give it that. You're here for the romance, and there's plenty of that, smutty scenes and all throughout. If that's your thing, they got you covered. But I did love the characters, especially Des, our fairy king, and I really did. It is a good story, and if you're okay with typos that do ease up, I do recommend that you would pick this one up. And then we reach March. In March, my reading drastically increased. In March, I read 7 books. That is the most books I have ever read in a month. So again, technically, one of those books was Dark Harmony, which was the last book in the Marketer series. So then the second book that I finished was Lucky You by Erika Carter. I was already hesitant going into this one. This was the last book in my collection that was from Book of the Month Club back when I had it several years ago. And I don't have a great history with those books. I haven't liked very many of them that I've read. So I was really hesitant in going in with this one to begin with. Plus it has really low ratings on Goodreads. And yeah, I was right. I did not like this book. I think I gave it 2.5 stars. This follows 4 pseudo friends, or kind of friends, but frenemies kind of situation. And they all decide to live together for a year in a remote cabin where they're doing this thing they call the project, which is supposed to deliver them from what they call unhealth, which is sort of a mind, body, and planet cleanse. These characters were deeply unlikable. They kept continuously making self-sabotaging decisions with no end in sight. None. And I think I probably would have liked it a little better had there been any kind of growth in the characters. And I don't mean just positive growth, like let's make a change, but just even them having the full realization of their actions and how they are keeping themselves down, even if they didn't make a change, would have been more satisfying than what we got, which was oblivion from their terrible life decision skills. Now, the only thing that actually kept me going was the writing. Erika Carter is a lovely writer. I actually finished this book, even though I didn't like it, in 4 reading sessions, which, I mean, that's pretty fast for a book that I didn't really like. So overall, it really, I guess, was just an exploration of maybe the apathetic side of human nature. There were no lessons learned, even though plenty of lessons were taught. Okay, next I read Everlost by Neal Shusterman. In this, Allie and Nick never get to where they're going in life or death. So on their journeys to wherever it is that they were going, they die in a car accident. Even after death, they lose their way going into the afterlife and instead end up in a place called Everlost, which is sort of an in-between world. And in this world, there are no adults, only children come here. In Everlost, they meet more children and they find more mysteries that kind of sets them off on this great adventure. Somehow, I made the mistake on my TBR for this month, and I said that Nick and Allie were siblings, but they are not. They were in two separate cars that crashed into each other, and so they didn't actually meet until after they were dead. So I did make that mistake, but I was correct in saying that the premise reminded me of a very creepy, dark Neverland. And I just want to share this one quote that kind of proved me right, and I giggled when I read it. It doesn't really give anything away, but great, she thought, I'm playing Wendy to a delinquent Peter Pan and the Lost Boys of Juvie Hall. So I was right in that one, but they are not siblings, they just die together. I did enjoy this book. It was fun being a weird word, I guess, to use in a book that is about dead children. But it was fun nonetheless. I did like the characters. They were children who acted like children, which is refreshing. So I did like that. I believe this book is listed as a young adult novel. And I think it's listed as a young adult rather than a middle grade simply because of the fact that it's about dead children. But it definitely, in my opinion, reads more like a middle grade book, and that's how I have it classified. So if you are interested in that, just keep in mind that it's going to read more like a children's book than a young adult. I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I finished the last classic I have in my collection, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. As far as classics go, I do tend to enjoy the more dystopian classics more than any other kind of classics, and that's exactly what this one is, and I did like it. This is a futurist, well, when it was written, it was a futuristic novel about the year 1984, where most of the world is under a dictatorship, where there are no freedoms, there are no individuality allowed. Everything is all for the greater good of Big Brother. I know that you can do all kinds of literary analysis with this book and all that good stuff, but as I've said before, I just like reading books if I enjoy them. And I did enjoy this one overall. I think I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read a book that I actually meant to read in April, but ended up listening to it in March instead. And that is This Is Not a Love Scene by S.C. Megale. This follows Maeve, a teenage girl who has big dreams of becoming a director one day, and she also happens to be in a wheelchair. During their final project for their film class, Maeve kind of develops a crush or a love interest on the star of her film, and then it kind of turns into a weird semi-love triangle when one of her friends expresses to her that he has a crush on her, and so she is suddenly thrown into this whole new experience of a love life while also juggling life with a disability. And she is kind of her story of how she's starting to learn and navigate through life. Both Maeve, so the character in the story, the main character, and the author have the same disability as I do, which is SMA. And so there were a lot of things in this book that I clearly directly connected with. Like there were, things about Maeve's life or how she does things. So for instance, she described once where she would use her mouth to kind of bite her hand or her finger to help move her arm, and I do that. So there were a lot of little things about her and her life that clearly is a direct connection to me. So I enjoyed this book more than most people enjoyed it, and I think that's probably why. There were a lot of reviewers on Goodreads, because this doesn't have great reviews. I think the average is like 3 stars. But a lot of the reviewers of this were saying how much they really hate Maeve as a character. And to be fair, yes, she is unlikable. I didn't like her either. But I think that because I didn't like her and because other people didn't like her, it made me like the book that much more. So she was portrayed as an actual human being, a teenage girl who makes stupid decisions when it comes to boys, okay? And I think that made me like it more because it definitely did the opposite of what most stories involving disability at the forefront do, which is basically make them into inspiration porn. The opposite. They're so good. They make the right decisions. They do this in spite of blah, blah, blah. And this does the exact opposite and makes her a human being, which I think is why I liked it so much. And then I read the second book to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which is A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid, Kemmerer. I really did like this one as well. This one, we follow Commander Gray more so than our 2 main characters that we had in the first book. And so it was a very different feeling of the book, but I still really enjoyed it. And it was just the typical middle book in a trilogy where it's kind of setting up for the last hurrah in the last book. Gray was by far my favorite character in the first book, and he continues to be my favorite character in the second book. I'm obviously not going to talk about the plot of this because it will give away the book, but I really loved it. I don't think I loved it quite as much as the first one, so I'd probably give this one 4.5 stars. And then lastly, I read a nonfiction book. This was not the nonfiction book that I had originally intended to read. I had intended to read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, but in March, which is why I read so many books in March, I picked back up embroidery. I had put it down for several months and I started doing it again last month in March. And so I was really craving audiobooks so that I could just listen to books and embroider. And I looked and looked everywhere for an audiobook of The Selfish Gene, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So I switched to another one of his books that I have, and that is The Ancestor's Tale by Richard Dawkins. And I enjoyed it. I know this is probably not the kind of books you come here for. It is a science literature book. It's sort of a pilgrimage through time. So it starts in present day humans and it follows our ancestry all the way back to the beginning. And so along the way, when we meet up at common ancestors with different groups of other organisms, we get stories from those organisms or those clades or groups of organisms. So for instance, like how the dodo bird went extinct. There was also a small discussion actually about race and racism based on science stuff. So it was kind of an interesting tidbits here and there. I really enjoyed it, but I also like the topic as well. I'd probably give it 4 stars. I did, again, listen to the audiobook of this, and of all the audiobooks I've read from him, I believe he narrates all of them, so I like it, and so it does capture what he intended it to capture because it's him reading his own book. So I liked it. It was a 4-star. And I just remembered that I forgot a book, but it was a book that I DNF'd. I think I DNF'd it in February because it was my nonfiction pick for January, and by the end of February, I had only read 30 pages of it, so I knew I wasn't going to finish it. And that was The Big Picture by Carroll. There were some interesting tidbits in it, but those interesting tidbits were separated by very, very long, boring rambles. So I knew if I only read 30 pages within 2 months, I'm not gonna make myself finish it, so I didn't. So, those are all the books I've read in the last 4 months. I hope I don't wait this long to do a wrap up again. Of the 16 books I read, I only panned 7, which brings my total of unread books down to 14. If you are still here, I thank you so much for being here, and I hope that means I will see you soon.